Okay, so in this nonsense that we have here, we are going to explain essentially how these teams actually end up making it to the semi-finals of this World Cup. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today. It's been a weird and a long journey, but we have to start somewhere. So let's start with New York. Remember, India came to this World Cup with a lot of spin options. They got to New York very early on, and India realized, well, that's not going to work. We're going to need to play extra pace, which wasn't quite their first choice. Also, if you are one of the favorite teams, you don't really want to go to a wicket which makes everything kind of random. But that said, for their first game, they played against Ireland, and all things considered, I thought they handled that one pretty well. They kept Ireland to a low score without too much trouble at all, and of course, Rishabh Pant played very well on a wicket that was unfit for humans. But that wasn't India's last time in New York, was it? Because they also had to play Pakistan there as well. And that game didn't go quite as well, right? They got off to a good start. Again, Rishabh Pant played a huge part in that. But unfortunately, they collapsed at the end and Pakistan was well on top until Jasprit Bumrah happened and Mohammad Rizwan played a shot that will haunt his dreams forever. But again, this was the New York wicket playing a part in all of these things. Even Ireland at one stage looked like they might get a few extra wickets, and Pakistan looked like they could chase that total because of how low it was. So India had to keep coming back and forward to New York and handle it, but they did. So they managed to beat Pakistan and they beat Ireland. There was also the USA game, of course, which was also important, and of course also in New York, because apparently, just like lots of things in this world, everything runs through New York. They won that game after New York did cause them some issues and the USA played a really good game. But let's not also forget that a small thing played a part there. As they were struggling and getting stuck a little bit, the USA gave them a 5-run penalty. Now, India might not have lost that game anyway, but I don't think we could say that the 5-run penalty didn't play a part, because I think it certainly helped them in that particular game. The good news for India at this point was that New York was done. But because India kept playing at New York, the favourite thing when it comes to Indian cricket at World Cups at the moment, intent watch, didn't really work. Even though they did show intent at New York, it didn't really matter because it didn't come out on the scoreboard all that much. That meant that when they played Bangladesh and then also Afghanistan, we had 2 more games that we could look at from an intent point of view, right? Against Afghanistan, people said they went a little bit too slow, although they still seemed to be fine. And against Bangladesh, people seemed to be quite happy with them. This was a low-scoring World Cup, but even within that, India looked like one of the few teams that could actually score. And that led them to Australia, which is kind of like a final boss in World Cup cricket, but not as much for India this time, as they were playing them well before the final. And they had a chance of making it very hard for them to make the semi-finals. Shall we talk about intent again? Because Rohit Sharma showed intent. He snorted intent. He chewed on intent's adrenal gland, right? He was just all about the intent, and Australia really never recovered from any of that. This was also a telling game because Jasprit Bumrah finally wasn't absolutely dominant, and yet it didn't matter. And at the end of this, they had vanquished Australia, or at least they had hoped they had vanquished Australia, and they were unbeaten. Now, there were some interesting things along their journey, like they keep playing day games. So they are playing a completely different World Cup than any other team in this tournament. And they also knew what their semi-final was going to be, right? Which meant that, yeah, they had to survive New York, but they knew eventually they were coming back to Guyana and they could play all those extra spinners. And one of those spinners beat Australia in Kuldeep Yadav, so they already look like a better team when they get to that final. So all things considered, India's had a pretty easy run in this World Cup so far, which I suppose will terrify some Indian fans. Let's get to Afghanistan, because they are, let's be honest, just a lot more fun. Afghanistan were in the group of death. Oh, do you remember our group of death? We had a group of death. We always have a group of death. Every tournament always has a group of death. This group of death, of course, was with New Zealand and also the West Indies. So Afghanistan had to go up against New Zealand in Guyana. That is not a good place for New Zealand to play, but it's a very good place for Afghanistan to play. They batted first, they made lots of runs, and New Zealand got hit by Fazal Haq, and they weren't the first team, nor the last team to have that happen to them in this tournament. And Rashid Khan also got rid of Kane Williamson, and that was barely even a game, right? It meant that because Afghanistan had beaten New Zealand, and also the two associates at that point, that they were unbeaten. Which meant that they had already qualified for the next round, but they still had to play the West Indies. When they did play the West Indies, they did not bat first, but they batted second. And here we saw the other Afghanistan, a team that did not look anywhere near as strong. And so West Indies dented that unbeaten record. Then Afghanistan had to play India. And again, they did not bat first, they batted second. And India maintained their unbeaten record, and Afghanistan actually lost 2 games at that point. Also worth noting that Jasprit Bumrah was absolutely on a different world in that game. But then Afghanistan had to play Australia in a must-win game. The important thing for them is they had to play in a place called St. Vincent. Before this World Cup, we didn't really know what those wickets were going to do. During this World Cup, we realised one thing: these wickets were going to help Afghanistan, and they were not going to help Australia as much. But on top of just getting a helpful surface, they also got to bat first again, which meant that their openers, Gurbaz and Ibrahim, could go absolutely nuts, as they always do when they bat first, and as they kind of never do when they bat second. And so Afghanistan made enough runs and then stopped Australia from scoring at all. Also worth pointing out that, as we mentioned with Fazal Haq bowling really well before, the other seamer that they have, Naveen Al-Haq, probably ended up bowling even better at times in this tournament, which meant that they could take early wickets against Australia. And on a St. Vincent wicket that could be a little bit tricky, once you get ahead of the game, which is why batting first helps, you put yourself in a great position to win. And Afghanistan at that point put themselves in a position to qualify, except they still had to play Bangladesh. And so they went up against Bangladesh. Now the problem for Afghanistan playing Bangladesh is that Bangladesh is actually a fairly similar side. If Bangladesh could find, functioning openers, they'd almost be identical to each other. And because of that, Bangladesh was also suited to play against St. Vincent. So the toss was going to be really important to Afghanistan. If they batted second, it was going to be very tough for them. But they batted first. And the second thing that was really important here is that even though Bangladesh bowled brilliantly on this wicket, they didn't pitch the ball up enough, and they didn't get enough early wickets because, again, Gurbaz and Ibrahim made 1,000 runs. Well, it wasn't 1,000 runs. It was it wasn't many runs, and it took them forever, but it was runs on a wicket that is not easy to score runs on. That meant that Bangladesh, like Australia, had to bat second on this St. Vincent's wicket, and that didn't go particularly well. It wasn't always smooth sailing because Afghanistan hadn't actually scored enough runs when they had batted first, but Bangladesh was still thinking that they could actually qualify for the semi-finals. They were wrong, but they gave themselves a chance, and because of that, they had to attack a little bit more, and that actually gave Afghanistan a huge advantage, and in this case, the batting second just came up short for Bangladesh. And so it was Afghanistan that were going through to the semi-finals and not Bangladesh. Now we come down here to our friends from South Africa. They also spent a lot of time in New York early on. Their first game was against Sri Lanka, who made negative runs in that game, and South Africa chased that easily. They didn't chase it easily. They were only chasing 77, and it took them an awful long time, and people were wondering, are they showing enough intent? It turns out they were showing the ample amount of respect to the New York wicket. But South Africa did get really good performances out of Anrich Nortje and David Miller. Their next game was against the Netherlands. Bartman and Miller both did well in this particular game, but this was a close game that realistically the Netherlands will think they should have won. Then South Africa went up against Bangladesh. Heinrich Klaassen and Anrich Nortje did very well for them again. But this was a close game that Bangladesh thinks they should have won. Then South Africa went up against Nepal. Shamsi did very, very well. But this was a close game that Nepal thinks they should have won. Then South Africa went up against the USA. This was a close game that USA thinks they probably should have got over the line in, but maybe they weren't that close, but it was close enough to put in the close game section. Then South Africa went up against England. You're not going to believe this, but this was a close game. Probably one that England thinks they should have won. Then South Africa went up against the West Indies. Shocked again that this was another close game. And you're going to be shocked again to think that the West Indies probably thought they should have won this game. South Africa has got performances out of pretty much every player in their lineup at the moment. And they are unbeaten. But we are still haunted by this. Are they a brilliant team that keeps just winning close games? Or are they making games much closer than they should be and barely getting over the line, and it's not going to last forever? And I'm not even going to say this word out loud, because in this tournament they have done this thing many times and they have still remained unbeaten. And if you can't read my handwriting, just guess. And now let us finish with England, who went up against Scotland, and let's be honest, were getting their ass handed to them a little bit from the Scottish openers. But more importantly, as usually happens with games in Scotland and in England, I suppose, rain came around. And it meant that England did not get a chance to win or lose their 4 points. Their next game was against Australia, and they got absolutely slaughtered by Travis Head, and then they didn't face the spin particularly well. So this meant that after 2 games, they had 1 of the available 4 points. But they did have 2 games to come up against Namibia and Oman. The Oman game came first, and they absolutely slaughtered Oman, meaning that England absolutely slaughtered the net run rate compensation. And straight after that, they played against Namibia, and they were going to smash them again in a net run rate game, but unfortunately for them, it also rained. This entire tournament, England has found a way to be involved with rain almost all the way through. It is the most English thing we have ever seen. But the other really interesting thing here is that, of course, Australia went up against Scotland, and after Josh Hazlewood kind of said that they maybe kind of would look at getting rid of England in this tournament, Australia then rested a bunch of players against Scotland and also played terrible in that game, and Scotland had a huge chance of winning as it was coming down at the death before Australia won that game. So Australia absolutely slaughtered England on the way through here, but also it's because of Australia that England even made it through to that next round at all. England would not have a chance of winning this World Cup at the moment if it wasn't for Australia. That is not something you hear that often. England then played the West Indies. And this was probably the first game when we thought, oh, okay, England is actually playing the kind of cricket that we expected. Adil Rashid and Phil Salt were absolutely brilliant. But then they went up against South Africa. Adil Rashid again and Harry Brook played quite well, but South Africa did win that, even if it was, ding, 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 a close game. So that does mean that at this part of the tournament, England are in the semi-finals, and they have comfortably beaten Oman, Namibia, the USA, and the West Indies. That is all. It's not the greatest pedigree coming into the semi-finals. But this gets all the more funny, of course, because England now have to play their semi-final all the way up here at Guyana. And not only is that a game that suits India's skill, and that India have known and been planning for that pitch for quite some time, here's the other funny thing. In Guyana, there is a chance that it might rain. England has spent more time in this tournament looking at weather reports than they actually have winning games. I mean, they're not even close to unbeaten, right? So you would have to say that England in that semi-final against India, that because of Guyana and the rain, India is the most likely to go through. But this is England, and they did beat India in the last World Cup in a knockout game. But if anything is going to help or hinder England, let's just circle this one last time. And of course, the other semi-final is just as interesting because South Africa is unbeaten, right? Yes, they've had a lot of close games, but they are unbeaten, and we're not going to talk about this as we said before. but Afghanistan are brutal when they play at St. Vincent. The Trinidad pitch is not exactly like St. Vincent, but it does help spinners a lot, and Afghanistan play spin and bowl spin pretty damn well. So that game might come down to whether they bat first or they bat second. If they bat second, chances are South Africa will make too many runs. If Afghanistan bat first, any total they put on the board, South Africa is going to be nervous of because of all of this, and let's be honest, because of all of this. So I hope this is as clear as it is in my mind, which is not at all. But I can tell you one thing, that all of this mess you see in front of you is definitely the road to the semi-finals. Let's go. This World Cup you can catch us every single day over at Jarrod Kimber Live. It is like the videos here, except they come out quicker and I forget what I'm saying occasionally. We have sometimes up to 3 videos a day on that channel, but we usually just have our scoreboard and normal podcasts. But you know, sometimes when a game is good, I just gots to go live. So gorge yourself over at Jarrod Kimber Live on my, I don't know, liveness?